AI is changing search forever. Brands must adapt quickly. Traditional SEO tactics are losing effectiveness. Visibility in AI results requires new strategies. How can businesses maintain relevance in this AI-driven landscape? According to Search Engine Land's 2023 survey, 60% of consumers are now using AI search tools for product research. This highlights the urgent need for brands to optimize for AI-powered search experiences. Here's the challenge. AI search doesn't rely on traditional ranking factors. It prioritizes different content elements. Brand visibility requires new optimization approaches. How can companies ensure their appearance in AI-generated search results? This is the Voice of Search podcast. I'm Jordan Koene, and joining us today is Chris Andrew, co-founder and CEO at Scrunch AI, which helps businesses optimize their presence across generative AI platforms. Chris will share how to win customers in an increasingly AI-driven world. Chris, welcome to the Voice of Search podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jordan. Great to be on here.
Absolutely. And I mean, no better time than now to talk about where AI is going, how discovery is changing for consumers. I just want to jump right into our first question about, AI and how it's fundamentally changing the search landscape. What are the differences that SEO professionals need to understand between what is traditional search and what search has been for the better part of 20 years and where AI-powered search experiences are going?
Yeah, great question. To go back to the stat you listed in that opener, 60% of consumers using AI for search in 2023, that was really before these models had web search capability. So that was consumers accepting out-of-date information, right? They were using ChatGPT to ask a question, and the model would warn them, hey, you're searching for a product, but this is 6 to 12 months out of date, but still consumers preferred the experience, right? Still, consumers move towards simplicity. And so when I think about what's changed, it's that I don't want 10 links from my search experience. That was just the best we could do at the time, right? I want an answer. I'm searching because I want an answer to my question. So at Scrunch, there's a couple themes we talk about with our customers, which is first and foremost, consumers move towards simplicity. Folks are habituating to AI search because I get an answer instead of 10 links. Now, if I'm getting an answer, that means I'm not visiting as many websites. So one of the themes we're seeing unfold in the search space is fewer people are visiting websites early in the funnel. I'm moving my research and discovery process to ChatGPT, Perplexity, Meta, Claude, even Google AI overviews, which means I get an answer to my question rather than having to go visit 3 or 4 different websites. In practice, I'm outsourcing browsing. At its simplest, I'm outsourcing browsing to an AI crawler to make sense of internet content for me to determine what I need to see to answer my question. And so I think that's the big shift that we're seeing, in terms of how it's impacting search engine professionals. I think sometimes these shifts get a little overblown. I think search engine optimization is still the foundation for how these models work, right? If you take the time to understand what's happening behind the scenes, is these large language models are looking at the search index. They're looking at sites that they can consider to use in answering the question. But once they are on your site, they're downloading that information, synthesizing it with other sources, and determining how to answer the question and who to cite. And so there's a number of significant changes in that space. But at the core, I think the customer journey is changing. I'm less likely to visit a website. I'm more likely to get an answer from my search experience. I'm more likely to refine that answer in a chat-based experience with my model of choice and maybe move along from there. And so that's a really, really big change in the customer journey that we're tracking with our clients.
No question. One of my favorite examples is the recipe experience. Right. For the better part of the last 2 decades, our recipe experience has been putting in one of our favorite foods to eat and just getting a bazillion pop-up ads, a very long story about grandpa's way of making lasagna, and a very confusing and muddled way of getting to the ingredient list and steps that you need to complete this recipe. But today, if you go to any AI model, put in your favorite recipe, you get a very simple, easy to digest, no pun intended, list of ingredients and steps into the process, which is really the simplicity, the ease of use that is AI models and AI search, and the direction that consumers want, right? They just want a faster, easier way of getting to the outcomes that they need. In order to achieve this, though, we have to be able to we have to be able to really focus on optimization for a whole new set of models, a whole new set of experiences. I'm curious, Andrew, how we do that. Like, what does optimization, how do we make it in this new AI search? How do we become present there?
Yeah, I mean, the recipe example is a visceral one, right? We've all experienced it. We go to Google and ask for, I've got this in my fridge, I want to cook. And you get a link to a recipe and you see the life story, 3 ads, an email pop up, 50 keywords, a backlink, and you can't find the recipe itself. You go to GPT, you ask the recipe, you put your ingredient in, you get an answer back. That simplicity is a delight. And I think ultimately consumers move towards simplicity. I think in optimizing for this, you need to think more human language. And what I mean by that is I think we've had a period of time where folks have built content for Google. It's like Google's the primary consumer of my content. If I'm found by Google, I get listed by Google, paid, organic, maps, listings, depending on the nature of your business. Nowadays, think about the fact that large language models have been built by humans, trained by humans, and they're looking for language. They're looking at the intent of the prompt. What is the question that this person is asking? And what is the best, closest match to answer this? What patterns am I seeing in the data to kind of uncover what this person needs, and what sites are going to be a closest match to the intent of the question? And so I was recently on a call thinking of, you need to write for humans and design for bots, right? If the primary consumer of your content becomes the ChatGPT crawler, the Perplexity crawler, the Meta crawler, the AI crawlers accessing your site, you need to make sure that the content is available in a simple form, right? These models are looking for unstructured data, looking for language on your site that they can download, scrape, and synthesize into an answer. And so at the same time, you need to write for a human, because the model is thinking like a human. It's looking for language. And so we're finding that the long tail of content is of increasing importance, right? The models are going deeper to find the intent and the match to what the human is searching for. Other things that we're finding is these models are trying to be unbiased in their answers. They don't want to just go to the company website and answer the question. They want to get user-generated content, be it from Yelp or Reddit or a review site. They want unbiased reviews from a listicle perspective. We're finding that our customers that have lists on their own website about them versus competitors really drives a significant impact, right? It's like, hey, here's my product compared to my 5 peers. We're cheaper, they're more expensive. We have better features, they have fewer features. That comparison is part of what the model's trying to do behind the scenes. And so if it can find a source that does part of that work for it, there's a greater likelihood you're going to be incorporated into the ultimate answer. And so, again, I think writing for humans, but designing for AI crawlers, meaning AI crawlers don't necessarily need a deep visual experience. In fact, it's pretty well documented in the search engine community that JavaScript causes a lot of problems for crawlers. While the Google bot has gotten quite sophisticated in its retrieval and understanding of intent, these AI crawlers are more elementary. They're looking for content and an exact match and struggling when it's buried on the page. And so those are some of the big themes that we're tracking in terms of optimizing for these models in basically in real time as the shift begins to unfold.
And Chris, you brought up a couple interesting points, and I want to dive into this more because the differences between traditional SEO and where we're going today in terms of supporting these AI models, making these AI models successful in understanding what our products and services are, go beyond just the content elements. You just brought up a great example of crawl and crawl capabilities. But when you think about prioritization and what we should be prioritizing, not just as SEOs, but as marketers, as business owners, as leaders and executives in companies, how do we prioritize the aspects that are going to be critical, the elements that are going to be formative, and the structure by which we serve content and information to these AI search models to become more present. So essentially, what do we prioritize? How do we create that pecking order of things to do to be as effective as possible with our time and resources to show up in these AI models?
I would say start from the customer perspective. And I think what's amazing about this shift is that's often where dialogue starts with a new customer of ours. We'll speak to a CMO who said, I I did a prompt and I thought my brand would show up and it didn't. That's kind of surprising. The question I ask on Google versus GPT versus Gemini, powered by Google, yields three different responses. Why? They're processing information and retrieving and returning information in a different way. So when I say start with the customer experience, there's an advantage in the fact that we are all shifting our behavior to AI search, right? Like I don't need to come and sell you that this change is happening. You're starting to use GPT more day to day instead of Google. You're starting to use an AI overview instead of visiting 5 websites. And so one of the core things we do with our customers is we automate the creation of personas for a given brand. Who do we believe you're selling to? Now you can come into our platform and refine those personas, but we think of personas as the foundation to prompt generation and prompt monitoring because people are getting different results from AI models based on the lens from which they're sitting, right? So if you're a finance executive sitting in Manhattan asking questions of GPT, you're asking questions in a different way, you're getting answered in a different way, and different sources are being cited. That's fundamentally the case. If I'm a university student sitting in Boston asking questions about finance, I'm coming from a different lens and a different perspective. And so these models have memory built in. They're adjusting their answer based on the nature of the prompt. They're adjusting their cited sources based on the intent of the user. And so when I think about what organizations need to be doing, it's deeply understand the persona of who you are selling to, deeply understand their experience of what they are learning about your category, your brand, your competitors in their native search experience, whether that search experience is in GPT, Perplexity, Gemini, AI overviews. Different populations use different models, right? So if I'm a B2B SaaS company heavily focused on APIs and developers, Claude, Anthropic, tends to have a bit more activity and volume compared to GPT, despite GPT being the leader. And so understanding at scale, what is the nuance for how my brand is showing up? Am I showing up in top of the funnel non-branded queries where people are doing research but not yet asking about my company? That's why we spend so much time in the enterprise platform foundation of our product to say, look, these are your personas, these are your competitors, these are the types of questions, these are the actual responses and citations. And if I'm a brand, really understanding that new customer journey is paramount, right? I think the shift is that my consumer may visit my website way further down in the funnel. We're seeing that referral traffic from AI sources is the highest converting organic channel. And in some cases, it's converting higher than the paid channel. Why? Because they've done so much research in the model. By the time they click to my website, they're ready to act. They're ready to book a meeting, buy the product, talk to an advisor, whatever the action might be, they've made their decision in the native search experience. And I think that's the number one shift when it comes to what am I optimizing for? Start with the new customer journey. Who are you selling to? What are they experiencing in the channels they prefer? And then start to think about the content gaps, the third parties that might help address those gaps, and what you can do about it overall.
I'm loving this conversation because it's really a unique challenge that we're breaking ground on now, right? We only have about 2+ years of understanding and experimenting and experiencing ourselves as consumers, how these AI models help us go through discovery, how we go through the process of seeking out information, finding new things to buy, understanding a new service, learning about the world, whatever it may be. These AI models help us consume information and become informed or capable of doing something. And as we learn more about that, it becomes increasingly apparent that the way we're measuring things is changing. Right? And historically, as an SEO, it used to be the game of how do I get ranking data? How do I get the most keywords into a platform to tell me how I rank in these 10 blue links? And that even evolved over the decades to different SERP experiences and ways in which Google has evolved both paid and organic listings. But at the end of the day, measurement is a key component to success. It's the
Hmm.
best way that we can understand whether what we're doing is working or not working.
Mm,
How should businesses track and measure their success in AI search environments?
mm,
This has
mm.
got to change. And I would really like to hear your point of view on how it's
Yeah,
changing and where we should go, Chris.
it's a great question. I think monitoring is the foundation. I honestly believe monitoring is something every organization is going to need to do. The amount of companies I've met that have assigned a person to be manually running these searches across the large language models, putting it into an Excel document, turning that into a graphic, and not realizing that the results they end up getting back end up becoming very biased because the model starts to know, oh, this person's asking a question. This person wants to hear me say their company, right? If I keep asking the model these questions, it thinks that it knows who I am, it has memory, it starts to answer questions in a way geared towards me. You might even get it to a point where it's like, in parentheses, your company is a great option in this field because it knows you. And so you really need to think more in a more sophisticated way about your monitoring practice. And it's why we've built out such an enterprise platform focused on who are your personas, who are you competing with, what are your themes and kind of traditional keywords, how do those translate to prompts in the new language of search? Because we're no longer in a search world where I put in the word, you know, Walmart. Nobody goes to ChatGPT and just types in Walmart, right? That's what we do in Google. We go to Google, we type in Walmart, and then Walmart has to pay to show up first so that I click on the Walmart site. That directional search is quite the monetization engine. People in GPT tend to ask very intent driven questions, whether that's in the research phase or in the comparison evaluation phase. It's another reason we organize all of our prompts by stages of the customer journey. Is this a top of the funnel prompt where someone's doing a highly considered research stage that has nothing to do with your brand, but your brand should be present versus, hey, I'm comparing brand A against brand B. Of course, you're going to be present. Those components become really, really important to pay attention to. So on the monitoring side, I think monitoring needs to be looked at comprehensively. What types of things do I need to be showing up for in the top of the funnel? How do I need to be represented more towards the bottom of the funnel when my product is being compared against my peers and competitors? And from a comprehensive nature, these models are non-deterministic. And what that simply means is that you're going to get different results for the same question at different points in time. If you ask GPT the same question twice, it will give you a slight variation on the answer, potentially different sources, potentially different answers. It's certainly giving different answers based on memory of people in different locations, but even the same exact question from the same user comes back with a different answer. So what does that mean? It means we need to track this at scale over time. You can't be like, oh, I did a search, we show up number one, because that same search might put you at number three, and a week from now, maybe you're not present. And so everything we do is at an enterprise grade, which is comprehensive monitoring multiple times throughout the week, capturing that information. Some enterprises, that's multiple times a day. Others is a handful of times a week, but ratcheting up that monitoring at scale so you have real time series data to say, okay, let's pretend I'm a clothing brand and making sure that my presence is showing up for the back to school specials is important to me. Well, we might need to run hundreds or thousands of prompts about that mother persona prepping to, clothe two or three kids going back to school. Is my brand showing up? Yes or no? For this variation, for that variation, what partner sites are being linked? Is it going to my shopping page or a blog page? Tracking all of that at scale is the foundation to understand the changes you need to make. And I think from a monitoring perspective, people get a little confused in the space right now. I would encourage companies to track the things you can actually track with certainty. I think there's four things there. You can track at the frequency with which these crawlers are visiting your site, right? We can work with you to do that, right? So if you want to understand how frequently is ChatGPT scraping my website to look at my content, we can track that. The second thing we can track is referral traffic. Am I getting visitors from GPT, Perplexity, Gemini, Claude to my site? You can track that. Once they're on your site, you can track conversion. Hey, this was a referral visitor from a ChatGPT search. Are they converting at a higher level, at a lower level? What pages are they landing on? How much time are they spending? And the fourth thing you can track with confidence is citations. Am I getting my website listed in these AI search results, or am I not present? Now, there's a million small things in there. Your presence score, your position score, your sentiment score, your ranking compared to competitors. But again, the four core things I'd be looking to track if I were an enterprise or any business thinking about the shift to AI search would be frequency with which these crawlers are looking at my content, referral traffic of how many visitors am I getting from these sources, the conversion traffic, conversion rate. Hey, compared to Google, are LLM sources that are referring traffic to me converting at a higher level, and my citations. Which sites that I own are getting referenced and linked to in AI search results, and how does it impact my overall performance? Those are the four things I'd be tracking from a monitoring perspective.
When we think about performance, right? Most businesses are going to be thinking about conversions. They're going to be thinking about leads. They're going to be thinking about some kind of an event, right? And historically, SEOs, the traditional SEO path was leveraging a collection of vanity metrics. May it be a rank position, may it be click through rate, may it be visibility or some sort of an index of these KPIs to then understand how frequently you're showing up, and at what degree you're showing up based on your competition or the market. Competition is very different when we think about an AI model and the results that come out of it. And you mentioned citations a couple times here. As we think about driving to performance, how should we be thinking about what metrics lead into that when it comes to AI models and monitoring and tracking?
Mm. One of the things we identified early is that your brand is no longer what you say it is. That's a scary thing for marketers, for leaders, for the board. For a long time, my brand was what I said it was. I could communicate it on a TV ad. I could get somebody to click on my website and read my mission statement or my vision or what my product is. Nowadays, when I ask a question about a brand, a product, or service in GPT, GPT is representing the brand, product, or service. It's telling me what it thinks of it. That's a completely different orientation. Now, the question is, how is it arriving at that answer? And I observed early in the AI shift that many organizations were organizing their internal data. Makes sense. Organize your internal data for RAG, clean it up, label it, get the right sources in the right places, and start running workflows and outcomes on your internal data sets, protect it. Very few companies were thinking about how all of the external data in the world is being used to represent your brand. And so when I think about leading indicators and what to measure, I want to understand what are the sources that are answering for my brand? What are the sources that the models are using when they're trying to answer questions about me? Right? Let's pretend I'm Walmart, right? If I'm Walmart, you better bet the AI models are accessing the Walmart website to use that as a source. They're also accessing the rest of the internet, news articles, blog posts, third-party sites, competitive sites that pit themselves against Walmart, right? And Walmart's a very large, box retailer example here with an e-commerce presence, but the message to be delivered is I want to understand how my brand, product, and service is being represented. What are the sources? What are the things fueling this answer? And how do I understand how I can impact that? Because let's say, for instance, the sentiment towards my brand is negative on a search engine, on a large language model search engine, be it GPT, Perplexity, or others. It's getting that content from somewhere. Right? I was on a demo recently with a very large Fortune 500 provider who was really upset about how the model was representing their brand's products and services. When they used our platform to dig into why they were being represented that way, what they found out was that there was a lot of content on the websites they owned, on their community page, on their help forum. Consumer submitted feedback very negatively representing their brand, and they were not going in and addressing those complaints. And so when the model was like, well, what's the reputation for product XYZ? They're out looking at the internet, looking at this company's website, and they found a bunch of negative content on the company's website about their brand, products, and services. And so when the model was being asked to compare that product against another, they were linking to the core domain and the subdomains of that business saying, hey, well, here's what the company says about itself. The community site says it's a terrible product and there's a problem with it. No wonder the brand is being misrepresented. So when you think about how all of the external content in the world is being used to represent your brand, I want to monitor towards what are the sources that are driving the output that represent me. That's kind of my starting point if I'm a small, medium, or large business.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's such a critical transition from where we've been so inward focused on our own website and now looking beyond that to all these sources to better understand how we can influence the main metrics of our business.
Hmm.
As we close out this deep dive, what are some specific steps that SEOs and content marketing teams can take over the next 30 days to begin optimizing their digital presence in AI search platforms?
There's a self-serving answer to this, which is come chat with us at Scrunch AI. There is a manual process that you can implement yourselves, which I would deeply encourage you to go do, which is go start paying attention to it, right? The things I listed out of the four things you can measure and monitor, some of those you can go start yourself. How frequently are these models hitting my website? Go look at your web logs, go work with your technical team to understand that. Go set up your analytics platform to track referral traffic. Obviously, we help you with both of those things and do that in our platform. There's a number of things you can do on your own to start paying attention to it. Deeply understand what content that you've created is valued by AI, is being cited by the models as the answer. Go look at the third-party presences that these AI platforms are prioritizing to answer questions and think about your relation to them. Are they pay to play? Do they have the misrepresentation of your pricing or product description? Go get those updated. We are oftentimes seeing very basic changes resulting in a significant lift in presence or a significant lift in referral traffic for fixing misunderstandings from the model. I think one of the reasons one of my beliefs is that all of search will be AI search. I think some of the new acronyms are silly. AEO, GEO, AIO. There's a million new acronyms. Nobody knows what to call it. I believe we're going to call it search. When I search, I want an answer. When I search, I want an outcome. Minimize the work I need to put in. What's happening when these people search in the new way? Are you showing up? Go dig in and start to track it and start to test new content. Start to think about the fact that these models really prioritize rich content sources, rich text-based content sources, be it a knowledge graph, a knowledge base, FAQs, glossaries. These types of resources are really rich assets that the models are looking to try to answer questions at scale. And so those are some of the big things I'd be thinking about, as I move forward.
All right, Chris, let's dive into our lightning round. So, our first question, crystal ball question for you. How will AI search tools evolve to handle complex queries over the next 18 months?
They're going to evolve to handle complex queries a lot better than our historical native search experiences. I'll start there, right? I mean, if you think about a complex query on Google, the more sophisticated users were adding all sorts of quotes and parentheses or, use Reddit, but not this, and like finding their own way to get a sophisticated query across. I think we're getting a sample of sophisticated queries in interfaces like a GPT and Perplexity via the deep research function, right? So if you're a paying user for GPT or Perplexity, there's a pretty delightful power experience of going in there, typing in your search, your prompt, and selecting that deep research mode. The first thing that happens is there's a validation phase. And I think we'll see this increasingly. I ask a question and the model comes back to clarify. It's like, hey, before I go run this complex query on your behalf, I just want to affirm that these things are true and that what other information can you supplement with me to really guide the outcome of the answer? Now, the closest we've seen to this historically would be Google correcting our spelling, right? It would be like, we think the search results you're seeing are for this because we think you misspelled it. You're like, no, I actually didn't misspell it. I got it right. Or, yeah, you're right, Google, you fixed it for me. So when I think about the shift into a more complex world, I'm watching people search in a completely different way, right? Voice search is actually becoming relevant. If you think about the first round of the Alexas and the Googles, it was kind of a cute demo. But now voice makes sense because I don't need to be too careful about my language. I can do the vomit salad, right? Of just kind of like describe the situation I'm having and then say, and build the bibliography for me, or describe the situation and write the essay, or describe the question and then compare the top 5 B2B SaaS CRM solutions. And that deep research mode is actually something you kind of want to set and forget. You'll actually see it go off and do the work, and it gives you a documentation of the work it did. It's like, okay, I ran this search. I found these 5 sources. 2 are white papers. 1 is like a commercial page. These 3 are third-party pages. I'm evaluating these side by side, and now I'm arriving at an answer for you. And so what do I think the future of complex search looks like? I think it's going to be closer and closer to the outcome that we had in mind in our head, but you really just couldn't get on paper. And I think one of the beautiful things about AI is it's a much more human experience if you allow it to be that. Right? I think we're all worried about the robots taking over. There's reasonable fears and guardrails we should be putting in place, but ultimately, it's working on our behalf in a really seamless way, and it understands our intent and does a better job of matching it. And so that's kind of the core thing that I'm keeping an eye on when I hopefully think about the future of search. And we're getting a really beautiful preview of it via some of these deep research capabilities that the more advanced models are introducing.
And as it pertains to complex queries or complex prompts, let's be more specific here. I'm just curious, over the next 18 months, will we have enough clarity to understand how personalization plays into that?
I think we already have some good clarity on it, right? I think you can see if you sit with your friend and you ask a question and they ask a question, you start to get a sense of personalization. Now, some models have it, others don't, right? So GPT has a lot of memory built in. They're retaining it, they're building it over time. Last I checked, Perplexity did not really have advanced memory capabilities. It's kind of restarting with each new search. I'm sure that's going to improve. There's an incredible team over there. But in terms of personalization, I think one of the interesting things I've seen from more of a um, people's brains work in different ways. And I think AI accommodates that for us. It's like, okay, Chris is an unstructured thinker. What he means is this. Maybe Sarah is a deeply structured thinker, but like benefits from some creativity and some more out there sources. And so I've certainly spoken to some friends who are like, GPT is saving my relationship because it understands how I think and it helps me communicate more effectively with my partner because they think in a completely different way. Or GPT is saving my job, not because it's doing my work for me, but because my boss really doesn't understand me and needs things in a different format. And I've been able to leverage this platform to drive those types of outputs for the people on my team to make them more efficient. So I think personalization becomes core, right? I think we could all be having different versions of the internet, different versions of answers. Again, the inputs are the question there, and the models are just going to get better and better at matching it to the output that we desire.
Awesome. Thank you. Buy or sell? Are you buying or selling that traditional keyword research will become obsolete in an AI search world?
I think it'll be less relevant. I think obsolete is the headline grabber. So if we want to use it to grab 5 more listeners, we could say it. But I don't think keyword research is going to be obsolete, primarily because Google is not going away in the next 18 months or maybe ever, right? Google is the inventor of the technology behind these large language models. Google owns search still, but it is fragmenting, right? Search is evolving into a world where there are multiple viable players, right? For the first time ever, it's not my default motion to go to google.com for my initial query. Personally, I'm starting in GPT or Perplexity, doing a little bit more in Claude. My search experience is fragmenting depending on where I am in the workflow of my day. And so, do I think traditional keyword research will be gone entirely? No, but I think there's going to be a much more complex mapping process to say, okay, this keyword results in prompts in hundreds of variations, right? The keyword of come up with it, powerful laptop, like, whatever the word or phrase is that I'm searching for. There's a million versions of that prompt in human language that come with context of like, okay, I need a laptop under $1,000. I'm graduating from school and I need to give my university laptop back. Okay, now I've got a bunch of context. Without saying it, they probably know that I don't need a laptop until May because that's when graduation is. Okay, what's on sale now might not be relevant. This person's planning ahead. So again, I think you take a traditional simplistic keyword, which historically led to the question of, am I showing up on the first 10 pages? And you extrapolate that keyword, you kind of blow it up into a million variations on a prompt, and it gets a lot more interesting in terms of mapping these things. So I don't think keyword research from the 2000s is going to go completely obsolete, but I think it will massively, massively evolve into more custom intent and custom prompts.
Toss up. Would you choose to optimize for traditional search engines or AI platforms if you could only focus on one for the next quarter?
So the next quarter, I think I would focus on, it's a very tricky question. I think I would focus on the tactics that AI models need, but in a traditional search way. And I realize that's kind of a dodge on your answer because traditional search engine optimization is the foundation for how these models are deciding what to look at. right? So if you're not being ranked by Google, by Bing, by OpenAI's search index, their new search bot, you're very unlikely to be surfaced from an AI perspective. Now, the long tail of content means they're looking further into the search results to find the right match. But I think there's a situation here where these two things do play nicely together, right? There's no reason you need to have a ton of complexity on your page with a bunch of JavaScript. I think you can serve Google and the AI models if you think about writing for humans. I think if you think about creating content for human intent, you're going to be able to win at both games. I think it's a very risky strategy to say SEO is dead when Google represents 90% plus traffic for most businesses today. I see that shifting very rapidly in some cases, but I would say I would not be walking away from traditional search engine optimization. I would be thinking very, very heavily about how AI optimized content, the way models read and interpret, can still fit into your overall search practice. So don't mean to dodge the question by picking just one or picking two, but I think that's how I would think about it if I were a marketer in a brand position.
If we're to stay just with traditional search, right? Just the conventional Google or Bing search experiences, and you had to do a toss up between investing heavily in AIOs or AI based experiences in the search
Mm.
versus non AIO placements, how would you invest between those two?
I'd invest heavily in the AIO outcomes, and there's two reasons why. The results for AI generated for returns are actually changing faster. And part of the reason is, in many cases, the models are accessing your content in basically real time. So I'm asking a prompt. The prompt is often turned into a search query behind the scenes. A search index is returned. The model is determining what pages to look at and looking at that content in essentially real time to answer and cite your page as a source. That's a very dramatic shift, right? If it used to be wait 3 days, wait 10 days for the next time you get indexed, that's the next time you're going to have a content change. We're shifting to a world where you're able to make a change to your site today, and there's a chance that an AI overview or a GPT generated result is going to leverage that new content 5 seconds later because it's crawling that page in real time. It's like, okay, this page looks relevant. The title and description seem meaningful. Let me go download and scrape this content and see if I can use it to answer my question. So if you make a change to your content pages today, you have a very high likelihood of having that content returned in a net new GPT result, perplexity result, AI overview. And so I think I would heavily optimize for those AI experiences on my search team.
Okay. Trend or trash? Is optimizing content specifically for AI retrieval a trend or trash?
I think it's a long-term trend. I think optimizing for AI retrieval is the way all of search is going to run. I think all search will be AI-powered search. And so I need to be thinking about, well, how does a large language model retrieve, source, cite, and reference content? If I do not understand that, I'm flying blind. What's the best way to understand it? Go back to your core monitoring questions of, okay, who's showing up for questions and who is not? Start to work backwards and look for recommendations on content gaps or third parties that it could address gaps for our business. And so I think if you put those things together, you're going to step back and say, it's definitely not trash to be optimizing for AI retrieval. And I don't even know if it's a trend. I think it's a long-term viable approach to make sure your brand stays relevant in this new customer journey. So I would think of it as maybe a timeless trend, given that content is being retrieved by models in different ways.
One piggyback off of that, as it pertains to AI retrieval and just the ability for many of these models to access your content, um, it's not at the same scale as Google, right? So Google just has such a deeper set of pockets and capabilities to consume and identify not just the core information that's on your website, but all of the relevant third parties that we've been talking about in this episode today. How do you prioritize AI retrieval if that's a long-term trend?
Yeah. Um, there's two things happening there that I think are interesting. That is true today for Google. I think the second biggest player is probably going to be a Bing, maybe followed by a Brave, right? These players that have a search index, they've organized the web. Common Crawl is another source that a search engine team is going to leverage to internalize the frequency with which their pages are being picked up, indexed, and understood in the web. Very significant shift in early March. of this year from the OpenAI team. Historically, GPT has heavily relied on the Bing search index to determine which pages it looks at when it's generating an AI answer. Because of the Microsoft partnership, OpenAI would look at a Bing search result, look at title, description, and snippets for pages, and decide which pages to download, scrape, and use to generate answers. If you dig in a little bit, you'll see that there's a new search index, the OAI search bot. They are competing directly with Bing, with Google, with Brave, with others by introducing their own way to index and map the web. So I think what we're going to see is you have these interfaces on top of search experiences. So you think about Google AI overviews as an interface. You think about Google as an interface. Perplexity, GPT is now an interface to interact with search results because they've got their own search experience in Instagram and Facebook, etc. The things that are powering most of these search experiences are the historical search index, the Google index, the Bing index, the Brave index, a handful of others that exist. OpenAI entering that foray with having their own search index is a very, very big shift in the market, and one that I'd be paying a lot of attention to because they are no longer a layer retrieving and returning results. They are the foundation mapping the internet to compete with Google, to compete with Bing, historically their core partner. And so when I think about which ones I'm optimizing for, I'm optimizing with a mindset that the shift is no longer just about pleasing the Google bot, pleasing the Google index. The shift is now towards a world where a significant part of my audience is now resulting in coming from different places. And that's something I would be paying a lot of attention to as a marketer, as a business leader.
Okay, final lightning round question here for you. Game plan. You're the SEO leader at a major e-commerce brand. What's your game plan for maintaining visibility when consumers shift to AI-powered shopping assistants?
Yeah, great question. My foundation would be my monitoring that I'd start today. I would start to deeply understand what is the experience when Perplexity, GPT, Gemini, others are landing on my page. That's where I would start. The second thing I would do is start to understand the agent experience on my page. So far, we've just been talking about crawlers. The crawler goes to an e-commerce site, tries to retrieve information and surface an answer and maybe a link. We're ultimately moving into a world where agents are actually going to act on our behalf. Really, the first viable player in this space is the OpenAI operator, right? Where you can actually watch it working on your behalf. You ask it a question, and you can sit back and watch as the OpenAI operator, the agent, goes to Bing, does a search, goes to the page, and tries to complete the action for you. You're actually watching a new search experience. You're watching a customer journey unfold. And so I would pay for a premium version of the product from ChatGPT. And if I were an e-commerce leader, I would go sit in front of my executive team with the 5 scenarios that I want to make sure my consumers can get through today as a human. Can they go to my website and buy the t-shirt? Can they go to my website and update their shipping information for next day instead of 3-day? Can they complete these tasks? Yes or no? That's the first question. Then I'm going to run those same tasks for an OpenAI operator. Can the agent, that is the very tip of the spear, there's going to be a million agents to come, but can the agent from maybe the most sophisticated model provider out there, GPT, complete these tasks? Yes or no? If they can't, I'm going to start thinking about what is the experience on my website such that it is causing problems for this agent. And I think it's really interesting. Websites cause problems for humans as they are today. I think there's some stat out there that like only, I think it's just under 70% of human tasks can be completed on a website. We as humans fail frequently at interpreting the content or driving the outcome we want from a website. We just can't find it. We fail. We make the mistake. So if that's us as humans, how much more successful or less successful is a agent, and start to design for more simplistic experiences driving for the outcome. So if I'm an e-commerce site, I'm probably looking to facilitate new transactions. That's probably the number one thing I want to track. If someone's searching on GPT, Perplexity, etc., is my brand showing up with a simple ability to buy? I'd also be dabbling in some of the paid experience. The Perplexity ads team is really leading the way, testing some new ad formats. Tends to be top of the funnel, tends to be experimental. They're very forthcoming about that. But what an awesome way to get in and influence the future of paid search by experimenting with a portion of your budget to see what's happening in that ecosystem and to get ahead of it. I think we'll see very, very new ad models coming out, new ways, potentially microtransactions to facilitate rewards on the web for driving traffic. But those are some of the things I'd be thinking about as an e-commerce leader. And I would be tracking all of this comprehensively and going to my C-level team to say, This is our brand presence on GPT compared to Google. If the world shifts, are we ready? If not, what are we doing to get ahead of it?
Okay, that wraps up this episode of the Voice of Search podcast. A huge thank you to Chris Andrew from Scrunch AI for joining us. If you'd like to get in contact with Chris, you can find a link to his LinkedIn profile in our show notes or visit voicesofsearch.com. For more information about Scrunch AI, visit scrunchai.com. If you haven't subscribed yet and want a daily stream of SEO and content marketing knowledge in your feed, hit the subscribe button in your podcast app or on YouTube, and we'll be back in your feed soon. Okay, that's all for today. But until next time, remember, the answers are always in the data.